"Who do you think you are?" The words echoed in my head before I even saw him. Rain pounded against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Grande Hotel, each drop shattering into tiny diamonds of light from the chandeliers inside. My hands trembled slightly as I balanced the silver tray loaded with crystal champagne flutes, the glass cool and slippery under my fingers. At 23, juggling 3 jobs to pay for my tuition, I had learned how to move fast, how to disappear into the background, how to make the invisible feel indispensable. Tonight, however, I felt very visible. The charity gala swirled around me, Manhattan's elite glittering in gowns and tailored suits, their laughter mixing with the soft hum of a string quartet. I weaved through the crowd, green eyes scanning, measuring, calculating my next step, and that's when I saw him. Dominic LaRosa, 65, tall, imposing, dressed in a black suit that seemed custom-tailored to command respect. His hair, streaked with silver, was combed back with meticulous care, revealing a face carved sharp enough to cut through the crowd's chatter. Ice blue eyes scanned the room with a calm precision that made the hairs on my neck rise. He wasn't looking at anyone else. He was looking at me. The air shifted around us as he moved, each step measured, purposeful, and the crowd seemed to part like water flowing around a stone. My breath hitched, not from fear, not exactly, but from the gravity of his presence, the kind that presses down on everything around it without a sound. And then the moment I had been warned about but never truly believed came. I dropped the tray. Crystal glasses crashed to the marble floor, shattering into a kaleidoscope of sparkling fragments, each clink echoing like a gunshot through the silent room. My knees hit the ground, hands shaking as I gathered the pieces, cheeks burning. Dominic stopped 3 feet away, eyes narrowing, studying me as if peeling back layers, seeing everything, forgiving nothing. The orchestra continued, the elite kept talking, but for me, the world had narrowed to his gaze. My chest tightened as he raised a single hand, pointing at me, voice low, precise, carrying. Across the distance, and he said it, "You are mine now." And instinctively, defiance flared inside me. I lifted my chin, met his gaze with every ounce of courage I had, and said, "Who do you think you are?" The world seemed to still, the chandeliers frozen mid-glint, the soft notes of the strings pausing in anticipation. Dominic blinked once, then twice, a subtle smirk tugging at the corner of his lips, and I knew immediately that this night would change everything. He didn't move closer, didn't raise a hand, just watched, his presence a tide that pressed against me, making my heart race faster than the heels I wore on the marble floor. My hands, still trembling, clutched at the tiny shards of crystal I'd failed to save. Every muscle in my body was alert, every instinct screaming. I could feel the eyes of the room on us, but Dominic LaRosa only saw me. And in that gaze, I realized, this wasn't about a mistake, or a fallen tray, or even a charity gala. It was about power. His power, undeniable, omnipresent, and mine to navigate whether I wanted to or not. My pulse thrummed like a drum in my ears, echoing against the marble walls as the silence stretched, broken only by the distant clink of a misaligned glass. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, letting the words linger between us, my defiance sparking something I couldn't yet name in those piercing blue eyes. The rain outside tapped a rhythm against the glass that matched my quickening heartbeat, a cadence of tension and uncertainty. And though the room buzzed with the hum of wealth and celebration, the only thing that mattered in that moment was the silent challenge passing between a 23-year-old waitress and a 65-year-old mafia boss who had just stepped into her life and claimed it with a single pointed word. Dominic LaRosa did not move, but his eyes held a depth that made it impossible to look away. Clara Bennett straightened, brushing the crumbs of shattered crystal from her black uniform, aware of every heartbeat echoing in her chest. She had rehearsed 1,000 ways to handle the elite, the powerful, the ones who lived in glass towers and controlled fortunes she could only dream of, but Dominic was not like anyone she had faced. His presence filled the room, an invisible gravity that tugged at her every thought and reflex. The crowd continued their gala, oblivious to the silent battle of wills unfolding near the terrace, champagne glasses clinking faintly in the background as the string quartet played on. Clara took a deliberate step back, careful not to stumble, her green eyes locked on his, reading every subtle shift in posture, every flicker of expression. She had learned that survival in a world like this depended on observation, on anticipating intentions hidden beneath polite smiles and expensive suits. Dominic tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that could have been mistaken for annoyance or fascination. Clara could not tell which, and that uncertainty both unnerved and intrigued her. She reminded herself to breathe, each inhale a conscious effort, steadying the trembling of her fingers that still bore the slight sting from the broken glass. He finally spoke, his voice low, controlled, carrying a resonance that seemed to penetrate straight through the social noise around them. "You are not like the others." Clara swallowed hard, the words unfamiliar yet not threatening, a recognition that unsettled her more than fear could have. The muscles in her shoulders tensed and relaxed as she instinctively squared her stance, refusing to offer weakness, yet aware that one misstep could unbalance the delicate equilibrium of power they now shared. A waiter passed too close, and Clara had to sidestep quickly, balancing the tray of untouched hors d'oeuvres, her heart racing, pulse thrumming against her ribs like a drum in an empty hall. Dominic did not flinch. He did not follow her movement. Instead, his gaze tracked every action, every micro-expression, cataloging details invisible to anyone else, weighing them against an unseen scale of judgment. The moment stretched, a taut line of tension between them, each second amplifying the quiet awareness that she was not merely being watched, she was being assessed, measured, and understood. The hum of conversations, the subtle clinking of silverware, the muted laughter, all became background, a soft hum beneath the sharp focus of their interaction. Clara realized then that she had stepped into a world ruled not just by wealth or power, but by precision, by the unspoken rules of influence and observation that Dominic embodied effortlessly. Every breath, every twitch of an eyelid, every shift of weight on the marble floor became part of a silent dialogue, a negotiation of presence and intent. And yet, beneath the surface of control, there was an acknowledgement, a spark of something unarticulated, that bridged the distance between the commanding figure and the young woman who had dared to speak her mind. Clara's thoughts raced, a mixture of apprehension and curiosity, each one calculated, each one a test of her own resolve against the invisible force of authority standing mere feet away. Dominic's eyes softened, just fractionally, the only concession to the tension that had grown into something electric in its subtlety. Clara felt the pull, a gravity not of fear, but of fascination, of a challenge issued silently across the polished marble floor. And as the gala continued, indifferent to the drama between them, she understood that the night had only just begun, that this encounter was the first page of a story she could not yet predict, but one she would navigate with every ounce of wit, courage, and strength she could summon. Clara Bennett straightened her back, pushing a strand of damp hair behind her ear as she followed Dominic LaRosa toward the terrace. The marble floor under her heels reflected the soft glow of the chandelier, each step echoing like a metronome counting off the tension between them. Dominic moved with deliberate ease, shoulders squared, eyes forward, his presence radiating authority that made the staff and guests subtly shift away, leaving a clear path as though he were cutting the air itself. Clara could feel the weight of his gaze, the subtle pull of his attention focusing on every detail of her movement, her posture, her expression. She carried herself with care, mindful of the fine line between confidence and vulnerability, each step a measured assertion that she belonged in this space as much as anyone else, even if the world had taught her otherwise. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, droplets racing down the glass like tiny specters chasing each other in the dark. Dominic finally stopped, turning slightly to look at the city skyline that stretched in all directions, and Clara realized that the view was as commanding as he was, a city at night that seemed to mirror the intensity of his presence. He spoke then, voice low but unmistakably clear, "The world does not bend for everyone, but it watches those who dare." Clara felt the resonance of his words in her chest, a subtle challenge, and a call to measure herself against the invisible standards he seemed to carry effortlessly. She adjusted her grip on the tray she still held, the crystal clinking faintly, grounding her in the immediate reality of the moment. Dominic watched her reactions closely, tilting his head slightly, noting the small shifts in her breathing, the tightening of her jaw, the flash of defiance in her eyes. Clara met his gaze, unwavering, letting a spark of curiosity mix with caution. The crowd, the music, the chatter of the gala all faded into a muted background as the unspoken dialogue between them intensified. Each glance, each movement carried weight, the silent acknowledgement of power and independence interweaving between them. Dominic gestured toward a quieter section of the terrace, a space that offered a panoramic view of the city streets below. Clara followed, steps measured, heartbeat matching the rhythm of the falling rain outside. He did not speak again immediately, letting the silence stretch, a deliberate pause that magnified every subtle interaction, every unvoiced thought. Clara sensed the magnitude of the moment, a shift from ordinary observation to an understanding that she was stepping into a world where authority was wielded with precision and scrutiny, and that she would be noticed for every choice, every reaction. She adjusted the tray once more, aware of the careful balance required to navigate both the physical and psychological space they now shared. Dominic finally spoke, a statement rather than a question, rich with implication. Not everyone recognizes opportunity when it stands before them. Clara nodded subtly, aware that her bold reply earlier had not gone unnoticed, that her courage and composure would be measured and remembered. The rain outside mirrored the tension in her chest, steady, unrelenting, pressing against the windows, a constant reminder that the world beyond this terrace was vast, unpredictable, and yet momentarily held in the stillness of their encounter. She inhaled slowly, centering herself, ready to step fully into the space he had carved, aware that every action from here on would echo in the unspoken dialogue that stretched between them, shaping the path of a night that was only beginning. Clara Bennett followed Dominic LaRosa across the terrace, her heels clicking softly against the wet stone as the city lights stretched like rivers of gold and silver below. She could feel the cool wind brushing against her face, mingling with the faint scent of rain that clung to the night air, and each inhalation sharpened her senses. Dominic moved with a measured calm, the kind of composure that commanded every glance, every passing shadow, to bend around him without effort. Clara sensed that he was not just observing the crowd but calculating, analyzing every interaction, noting the subtleties that most would overlook. She adjusted her grip on the tray, now empty, the smooth metal edges pressing slightly into her palms, grounding her in the moment. His eyes, steady and piercing, followed her movements, and she found herself walking with deliberate poise, matching the rhythm of his steps, not out of obedience but as an unspoken acknowledgement of the game being set before her. Dominic paused near the edge of the terrace, hands resting lightly on the stone railing, gaze fixed on the horizon, and Clara realized the view was both expansive and confining, the city below alive yet distant, the perfect mirror of the tension that stretched between them. He spoke, low and deliberate, the words carrying a weight that seemed to reverberate through the very air around them. Control is not taken lightly, and neither is respect earned. Clara felt the subtle challenge within the statement, a nudge toward proving herself, not through compliance but through presence, through intellect and intuition. Her green eyes met his blue ones, a silent acknowledgement that she understood the stakes, the unspoken rules of interaction in this arena of power. The distant hum of the gala, the soft clinking of glass, and the faint notes of the string quartet all receded into background white noise as the unvoiced dialogue between them intensified. Each glance, each micro-expression became a negotiation, a test of resilience and awareness. Dominic finally turned his head, allowing a flicker of something almost imperceptible to cross his features, a mixture of curiosity and appraisal, the faintest hint that he recognized in her a spark that differed from the rest. Clara's pulse quickened, a blend of anticipation and focus, knowing that every measured move would be catalogued, every response weighed. The wind shifted, brushing against her hair, lifting strands in a dance that made her keenly aware of the physicality of the space they occupied, the boundary lines of authority and presence. Dominic gestured toward the city lights below without breaking eye contact, a subtle invitation to observe, to understand, to grasp the weight of influence that radiated from him effortlessly. Clara absorbed the panorama, recognizing the silent power structures at play, the invisible currents that shaped every decision, every expectation. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, the cool night air filling her lungs, grounding her focus, as Dominic spoke again, voice calm, precise, carrying the same weight as before. "You are learning that perception can shape reality." Clara nodded, acknowledging both the lesson and the challenge, her mind racing with understanding and strategy, her body poised, ready to navigate the next steps of this encounter with clarity and measured confidence. The city stretched endlessly, alive with motion and light, yet the terrace felt like a universe unto itself, containing the unspoken conversation, the tension, and the possibility of the night that lay ahead, a night that had only just begun. Clara Bennett stood near the terrace railing, city lights reflecting in her wide green eyes as the chill of the night brushed against her skin. Dominic LaRosa remained a few steps behind, his posture relaxed yet undeniably commanding, each movement deliberate, measured, and weighted with authority. The gentle patter of rain had slowed, leaving a soft mist that clung to the marble and the edge of her hair, lending a hushed serenity to the tension that still hummed between them. She took a cautious step forward, letting her gaze sweep across the skyline, noting the tiny bursts of light from windows high above, the slow pulse of traffic down below, and the distant glow of street lamps flickering against wet pavement. Dominic's eyes never left her, scanning, evaluating, as though cataloging her reactions in a mental ledger, noting every subtle shift in stance, every nuanced expression that betrayed thought or curiosity. Clara felt the weight of his attention press upon her, a gravity both intimidating and strangely clarifying, sharpening her focus. She adjusted the folds of her uniform, aware of the disciplined poise that her posture conveyed, realizing that in this silent dialogue, every micro-movement spoke louder than words. Dominic finally spoke, his voice a measured cadence that cut through the ambient sounds of the gala below. Strength is not only shown in defiance, but in knowing when to act. Clara considered his words carefully, letting their meaning settle in, feeling the dual layers of command and guidance interwoven in the statement. Her pulse quickened as she understood that this encounter was both a test and an invitation, a challenge to assert herself within the bounds of observation and restraint. She allowed herself to step closer to the railing, the cool stone grounding her, and exhaled slowly, letting her presence become as deliberate as his scrutiny. Dominic inclined his head slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of her composure, before gesturing toward a quieter corner of the terrace, a space where the city spread out unbroken and the mist carried a faint scent of rain and distant flowers from rooftop gardens. Clara followed with careful precision, each step deliberate, aware that the silent rhythm of their interaction was as critical as any spoken exchange. The air between them seemed charged, the tension neither threatening nor overtly aggressive, but compelling, an invisible current that drew her attention and focus entirely toward him. She felt her awareness heighten, noticing the smallest details, the pattern of the stone beneath her shoes, the soft swish of Dominic's coat as he moved, the reflective gleam of his cufflinks in the terrace lights. Every detail became part of a larger understanding, a lesson in perception, in reading intent and action in someone who wielded influence with the subtlety of experience. Dominic's voice broke the quiet once more, calm yet resolute. Observation precedes action, and understanding is its measure. Clara nodded subtly, recognizing the layered significance of his words, the blend of instruction and expectation, and she felt a renewed determination to navigate the evening with awareness, poise, and intelligence. The city spread endlessly beyond them, alive and indifferent, yet for this brief moment, the terrace had become a universe defined entirely by the silent exchange of power, attention, and emerging understanding between a young woman and a man who had commanded it all with quiet certainty. Clara Bennett followed Dominic LaRosa as he led her through the quieter part of the terrace, the mist from the fading rain clinging to her coat and softening the glow of the city lights below. Each step felt deliberate, each movement measured, as if the terrace itself had become a stage for a silent negotiation of presence and intention. Dominic's gaze remained fixed on her, unblinking, his posture relaxed yet undeniably commanding, a presence that made the space around him seem smaller and more focused. Clara adjusted the folds of her uniform, aware that every gesture, every glance, every subtle movement would be observed, interpreted, and remembered. She could feel the cool marble under her shoes, grounding her, anchoring her in a moment that seemed both suspended and urgent. The air carried the faint scent of wet stone and distant flowers, mingling with the muted sounds of the gala below, the soft clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, all fading into a background hum as the focus narrowed between them. Dominic spoke, voice calm and precise. People often underestimate what they can do when they are truly seen. Clara felt the weight of the statement, the dual implication of observation and expectation pressing upon her like a subtle current. She squared her shoulders, inhaling deeply, and let the words sink in, the cool night air filling her lungs, sharpening her focus. As they approached the edge of the terrace, Dominic motioned toward the city below, the light stretching endlessly in every direction, a reminder of scale, of consequence, of the vastness of influence and power. Clara's eyes followed, noting the intricate patterns of streets and buildings, the pulse of life far below, and she felt a quiet understanding that this was a world governed not by chance but by precision, by careful attention, and by unspoken rules. She turned her gaze back to him, meeting the intensity of his eyes, sensing the challenge embedded within his silence, the unspoken expectation that she would meet it with intelligence, composure, and awareness. The wind picked up slightly, brushing against her hair, carrying with it a whisper of rain and the distant energy of the city, and Clara felt a subtle thrill of anticipation, a recognition that the evening was a test not only of observation but of adaptability and resilience. Dominic spoke again, his tone deliberate, a blend of instruction and acknowledgement. Understanding comes from attention, and respect follows those who notice. Clara nodded almost imperceptibly, committing the lesson to memory, letting the rhythm of their interaction guide her awareness, every movement, every micro-expression a step in a dance of perception and recognition. She felt her pulse settle, her body responding to the quiet tension, poised yet relaxed, ready to navigate the nuances of the encounter, to move with precision and thoughtfulness through a space where power was measured not by words alone but by presence, by insight, and by the ability to act deliberately in alignment with intention. The city below continued to glow, indifferent yet beautiful, but the terrace, this moment, had become a universe of focus and meaning, defined entirely by the silent dialogue and the unspoken agreement between a young woman and a man whose authority was absolute and whose expectations were high, and Clara felt herself rising to meet them with every careful, deliberate choice. Clara Bennett stood at the edge of the terrace, the soft mist from the evening rain settling on her coat as the city lights below shimmered like liquid gold. Dominic LaRosa remained a few steps behind, the authority in his posture unwavering, the quiet power he radiated palpable, a force that bent the space around him without effort. Clara adjusted her stance, her feet planted firmly on the marble, aware that every micro-movement, every tilt of her head, every shift in her gaze was being observed and weighed. The wind carried a faint scent of wet stone and distant flowers, mingling with the hum of the gala below, now a muted background as the focus tightened between them. Dominic spoke, voice low and deliberate, words resonating with weight and expectation. Courage is recognized, but it must be tempered with awareness. Clara felt the implication of the statement deep in her chest, understanding that boldness alone was insufficient, insight and perception were required to navigate this arena. She met his ice-blue gaze, steady and deliberate, conveying both acknowledgement and silent challenge. The terrace seemed to shrink around them, the city below a distant canvas, leaving only the space they occupied, charged with tension and attention. Clara let her hands rest lightly on the railing, feeling the smooth, cool stone under her fingers, grounding her while she measured her responses, the unspoken dialogue with Dominic shaping each choice she made. He moved slowly to a corner of the terrace where the view expanded, the cityscape stretching in every direction, and gestured subtly toward the skyline, a silent invitation to observe, to consider, to reflect. Clara's eyes followed, noting the movement of cars far below, the shifting patterns of lights and buildings, the rhythm of life continuing unheeded by those above. Dominic's voice followed her attention, calm and precise. Observation is the precursor to understanding, and understanding allows influence. She inhaled, letting the words resonate, feeling the rhythm of the night, the pulse of the city, the subtle play of authority and autonomy that existed between them. Her mind catalogued the details, the soft clink of a distant glass, the murmur of conversation, the movement of staff along the terrace, all feeding into the heightened awareness she had cultivated over years of balancing work, study, and life in a world that demanded vigilance. Dominic's gaze softened fractionally, the faintest hint of approval, as if acknowledging that her presence was more than passive, she was engaged, alert, and responsive. Clara felt a cautious thrill, a mixture of anticipation and resolve, knowing that this encounter was a test of perception, judgment, and resilience. The terrace, the mist, the night, the city lights all became a universe of subtle negotiation, each moment a measure of insight and poise, a dance of attention and recognition where neither movement nor word went unnoticed. Clara adjusted her breath, her posture, ready to respond, to engage, to meet the unspoken expectations that Dominic LaRosa had laid before her, aware that the night was shaping a story that required wit, courage, and a steady mind, each choice a step deeper into a realm where power and awareness intertwine with every glance, every gesture, and every deliberate decision. Clara Bennett felt the subtle shift in the air as Dominic LaRosa guided her toward the final corner of the terrace, a place where the city stretched endlessly, lights twinkling like constellations mapped across the streets below. The mist hung lightly around them, the lingering scent of rain blending with the faint aroma of distant gardens, creating a quiet, almost sacred space away from the gala's hum. Dominic stopped and turned to face her fully, his stance unyielding yet inviting, a paradox of control and consideration that made her pulse quicken in anticipation. She met his gaze, ice-blue eyes locking with green, each studying the other, each measuring presence and intent, the silent dialogue between them growing more intricate with every breath. Dominic's voice broke the quiet, measured and calm, carrying a weight that demanded attention without demanding fear. Every decision defines the space you occupy. Every word, every gesture, every thought is noticed. Clara absorbed the depth of his statement, recognizing that boldness alone was insufficient. Perception, awareness, and intuition were as vital as courage. She adjusted her posture, letting her shoulders settle, grounding herself in the marble beneath her feet, aware that the terrace had become both a classroom and a proving ground, a place where authority and understanding intertwined. The distant murmur of the gala, faint clinking of glasses, and the soft strings of the quartet became background noise as the focus narrowed entirely on the interplay between them. Dominic inclined his head slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that Clara's composure and responsiveness had not gone unnoticed, a silent affirmation that the tension between them was productive, a dialogue of respect and measurement. Clara felt the thrill of awareness, a sharpened clarity as she noted the smallest details, the gleam of his cufflinks in the terrace lights, the way the marble glinted under the mist, the rhythm of distant traffic below, and the soft wind brushing against her hair. Each detail fed into her understanding of the environment, the rules of interaction, and the unspoken expectations set by his presence. Dominic took a step back, gesturing subtly toward the cityscape, an implicit invitation for Clara to reflect, to take in the expanse, to recognize the influence of scale and perspective, and she did, feeling the weight of awareness settle into her mind, and understanding that perception and insight were as powerful as command. She met his gaze again, steady, confident, aware that her responses, her observations, and her subtle actions were all components of a dialogue that required precision and mindfulness. The terrace felt suspended in time, a universe defined by silent negotiation, awareness, and the quiet acknowledgement of potential. Clara inhaled slowly, centering herself, letting the cool night air fill her lungs, and she realized that the evening had shaped a new understanding between them, a balance of power, respect, and the anticipation of steps yet to come, each moment a preparation for the continuation of a story that neither words nor gestures alone could fully articulate, but which was clear in the rhythm, attention, and deliberate choices shared between a young woman and a man who commanded his world with unwavering precision. Clara Bennett inhaled deeply, the cool night air filling her lungs as she steadied herself on the terrace, her gaze sweeping over the glittering city lights that stretched endlessly below. Dominic LaRosa stood beside her, slightly behind yet unmissably present, his posture an unspoken declaration of command and watchfulness. The mist from the fading rain clung to the marble beneath their feet, making each step deliberate, each movement calculated, a silent dialogue unfolding without words. Clara's pulse thrummed in rhythm with the distant hum of the gala, a background beat that contrasted with the sharp focus demanded by the presence of Dominic, who observed her with quiet precision, noting every subtle shift, every fleeting expression, every micromotion of her body. She straightened her shoulders, letting the rhythm of her breath and the cool touch of stone under her fingers anchor her awareness as the unspoken tension between them stretched, a taut line that held weight and expectation. Dominic's voice broke the quiet, calm and precise, confidence is measured not in defiance alone, but in the clarity of observation and the understanding of consequence. Clara felt the meaning settle in her chest, a mixture of recognition and anticipation, understanding that the moments shared here were as much a lesson as they were a test. She turned her gaze back to him, meeting the calm, unyielding ice-blue eyes that had assessed her every step, every glance, and she saw the faintest hint of acknowledgement, an unspoken respect for her composure, her attentiveness, and the courage it had taken to meet his gaze directly. The wind shifted, brushing lightly against her hair, and she felt it carry a subtle thrill, a sense of awareness sharpened by the exposure to his presence and the quiet gravity of the space they occupied. The terrace seemed suspended in time, a realm where the city below was distant, the sounds of the gala muted, and the focus existed entirely on the silent exchange, the interplay of observation, measurement, and understanding. Dominic gestured slightly toward the horizon, a motion as effortless as it was commanding, inviting Clara to reflect on the vastness beyond the terrace, to absorb the scale of influence, and to recognize the subtle currents of power that defined the night and the world they navigated together. She did, letting her eyes trace the pulse of traffic, the shifting patterns of lights in distant windows, the rhythm of life unfolding far below, and she felt a quiet alignment, a harmony of attention that matched his expectations and tested her own insight. Dominic's voice followed, calm, deliberate, and rich with meaning. Perception defines action, and understanding shapes the impact of every choice. Clara exhaled slowly, grounding herself in the marble, the mist, and the weight of the city around them, aware that the evening had sculpted a landscape of quiet comprehension, observation, and emerging trust. Her thoughts sharpened, her senses heightened, every motion, every micro-expression now a conscious act of engagement, a step into the rhythm of a world defined by precision, awareness, and unspoken negotiation. As the lights of Manhattan stretched into the distance, Clara realized that the night had drawn a line between ordinary moments and moments of significance, between observation and action, and that she had stepped fully into the continuum of presence, influence, and understanding with Dominic LaRosa, a man whose authority was absolute and whose expectation of awareness shaped the narrative of their encounter in every deliberate, silent gesture.